thanks for returning to the American constitutional tradition and another lecture. I said in my last one that we would start with the three branches of government, and I wanted to start with the executive branch because sadly it's the one that people pay the most attention to and think is the most important when it's not supposed to be. Today I wanted to start by running a quick test. So out of all these presidents, I'm going to put them up on screen here, who were the best two? We've got George Washington, John F. Kennedy, Theodore Roosevelt, Grover Cleveland, Franklin Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, John Tyler, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump. And yes, in this case, there actually is an objective answer when you go by a specific metric. So go ahead and stop the video and make your choices real quick. Now, if out of all of these, you chose Grover Cleveland and John Tyler, you'd be correct. However, I would guess most of you probably chose either George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. Maybe like a runner-up might be Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump for conservatives, or Franklin Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy for the left, and Teddy Roosevelt's usually in there somewhere. And most people haven't even heard of Cleveland or Tyler, really. I think Cleveland has become a little bit more popular in some right-wing circles, but Tyler, no. Tyler, no one's ever really talked about or heard of. So to be fair, this was a bit of a trick question for everybody, especially if you're among the people mentioned in my intro video who don't feel very confident they know much about politics or the Constitution, and that's fine. Because if you have no interest in the subject, you've never went further beyond probably just like a mandated high school course. But everyone has to start somewhere. So for the people who constantly say they love the Constitution, however, we do have a problem. Because there are a lot of ways the presidents can be measured to see if they succeeded, for sure. And we get long lists of different traits and accomplishments given by so-called, great historians and like our, professional historians every year. But hilariously enough, if you read these lists, the one thing none of the historians ever put in there as a positive trait is if the president's followed the Constitution or not. I mean, like, seriously, like, unlike all other traits, that's the only thing that they swear to uphold on the Bible, isn't it? Like, they're not like, we're going to swear to uphold, giving you all, Obamacare or attack Iraq or, open the Strait of Hormuz. Like, if people right or left hold the Constitution in such high regard, wouldn't that be the first thing that we'd notice and the biggest thing that we'd want to measure our president's success on? So who were Tyler and Cleveland, especially compared to, people like George Washington? I mean, if we were going beyond just the Constitution, Washington would probably be the man. Like, he was the guy who refused to be king. He was the perfect statesman, and you can't really beat that. And honestly, in these, as I said, the kind of the so-called historian lists that we do, presidential lists that we do every year, Tyler and Cleveland are near the middle and bottom usually. They're not that high up. But the funny thing is even though probably every president has competed impeachable offenses, or at least some sort of offense in office, but surprisingly, when added up, the presidents who committed the least amount and stayed closest to what the Constitution it was at the beginning were actually Tyler and Cleveland. According to different historians who've measured the presidents according to the Constitution, Tyler and Cleveland are constantly near the top, usually in the top 5 or top 3 in every single list. And Tyler's usually number 1. So let's go over them real quick. Cleveland was famous for going against the infamous corruption of the Republican Party in the 1800s, right after the Civil War. They got really corrupt. And in a more famous story, he vetoed a government aid to farmers bill during a time of great hardship that they were going through. Knowing that it was against the Constitution for the central government to provide assistance to anyone like that. And, he actually, when asked about it, he wisely, said that he foresaw that that door, once it was opened, would never close again. Like, if we start giving, like, everyone's going to expect it. And looking how much we as a country spend on different types of farming aid, corporate welfare, disaster relief, and all sorts of other things today, and probably taking into the consideration the amount of disgust and amazement a lot of listeners are probably experiencing right at the moment, being raised in a world where this is just, the way things are supposed to be. You have a disaster happen and the government sends in aid. It's not hard to see that Grover was obviously completely prophetic about it. As for Tyler, in these great president lists, he's remembered by modern historians for being just a weak president that got kicked to the curb by his own party and had no really any effect on anything. But the funny thing is you have to read why he was kicked out of his party and why his party didn't like him. He only got ousted because he refused to do what they said when in office. He was actually the first vice president to become president. In fact, he set the precedent for doing that, which, honestly enough, could probably be one of the few things that I'd say you could argue that he did wrong as president, was becoming the president in the first place. And, people could argue over that. But regardless, as president, a lot of people thought in the Whig Party, he's his accidency. He's just going to do the party, toe the party line, do whatever we want. And he refused to. When they passed bills that he thought were unconstitutional, he vetoed them. And because of that, like, his whole entire cabinet resigned, his whole party kicked him out and turned against him. And he stood his ground. He actually went back to his own manor, his own home, and renamed it Sherwood Forest. Because he said, like, basically, I'm Robin Hood in this instance. But, like, isn't this, like, what so many people want today? Like, they always want a person who will fight for them, who will fight for what's right, put the Constitution over party. We say we want that, yet here's the guy who did it, and no one even knows his name. Like, no one knows about him. We're not taught about him, and no one's taught this about him. So I can tell you right now, if someone like Cleveland came today and tried to deny government disaster relief to anyone, he would be called a monster. We'd immediately elect someone else eager to take his place, and they would offer everything from free healthcare, housing, all the way to robots to wipe your butt. Okay? And Tyler wouldn't even get anywhere near the Oval Office because he would be seen as someone who doesn't get things done. We only need people who get her done. Hopefully that's not a registered trademark. Several people, have come over the past few years, like the Paul family, Thomas Massey, who just want to even go vaguely back in that direction of constitutional principles. They tell people, like, hey, maybe we should slow down a little. Maybe we should follow the Constitution a little bit more. And the conservative, yes, the conservative party, the Republicans, the one who say they love the Constitution all day long, spit in their faces continuously. You go online right now, and these people, like, even just libertarians in general, which these people are somewhat libertarian. I was libertarian in the past, so I can say that they're somewhat libertarian. They're, I'd say, almost moral Republican in some ways. But, they're just dumping on them right now because they want them out of the party. And you know what? You don't have to agree with these. You don't have to agree with, like, the Pauls or Masseys on everything. Because I don't always either. But you know what? They're definitely better than candidates endorsed by Daily Wire or Blaze or Turning Point USA or any others, these modern mainstream conservative news outlets. I'll tell you that. And don't worry, this isn't the last time I'll clash with the get her done crowd. I'm going to go into a lot more detail about that too, because I think pragmatism is one of the dumbest excuses for not following the Constitution that I've ever heard in my life. Because you actually you can come up with a real plan and do it. And they don't, just because in all reality, they just want power. And that's always been the way with the Republican Party, sadly. They say they want small government, but in all reality, they want power. I wouldn't say the Democrats are really better, but we'll get into with them too. So yeah, we'll be circling back around to all this in future lectures and talking about different groups of people and how they react to constitutionalism and people saying they want constitutionalism. But, to kind of end off today, I think it's time we start telling ourselves the truth. And the truth is we don't deserve or want any leader like Tyler or Cleveland or any of the founders, even like the worst founders on their worst day. The truth is we're actually liars. Worst of all, we can't admit it to ourselves because we're either too ashamed or so cognitively dissident that our brains have just stopped working. But we tell ourselves just comforting lies the whole time that if we were given the chance, of course we would listen to these right people if they came along. And you know what? That's the same lies that every person in this position has justified themselves with in all of history. And in fact, if you're part of Western religion at all, this sounds awfully familiar. All right, so we're going to end today. So how did I do? Was anyone offended today? Hopefully. I wouldn't be doing my job if that wasn't true, but if not, stick with me. Your time will come. But yeah, we'll keep going with the presidency. This is actually going to probably be the longest one that we go on, is the presidency, just because there's so much to talk about how people view it today and, like, responding to all these different arguments. And I'll start responding more and more originalism and original sources as time goes on. So this has been the Midnight Writer. See you down the road.